I didn't believe Tommy Winters the first time he tugged on my sleeve and pointed into the thick pine forest that bordered our trail. We were halfway through the night hike, and I'd just finished explaining how nocturnal animals navigate Pine Ridge National Park. "Look, green light," Tommy whispered, his blue eyes wide with excitement in the beam of my flashlight. I followed his small, outstretched finger toward the darkness between the trees. For a split second I caught it, a faint emerald glow hovering about 5 feet off the ground, pulsing once before vanishing. "Just a firefly, buddy," I said, ruffling his blonde hair. "A big one." Tommy frowned up at me. "That wasn't a firefly, it was too big." I smiled at his certainty. Kids his age were always seeing things. Dragons in clouds, faces in tree bark. Part of what made guiding families so fun. "We should keep moving," I told the group of 12 gathered around me on the narrow dirt path. "We've got Osprey Point still ahead, and that's where we might spot some owls." Parents nodded appreciatively, clicking on their own flashlights as we proceeded. Tommy's father gently pulled him along, but the boy kept looking back over his shoulder at the spot where the light had appeared. It was my 3rd week as a seasonal guide at Pine Ridge. The job had seemed perfect when I applied, a way to combine my environmental science degree with my love of hiking. The daytime tours were straightforward enough, pointing out native plants, explaining forest ecology, answering questions about wildlife. But the night hikes always carried a different energy. The forest transformed after sunset, shadows deepening between ancient pines, familiar landmarks becoming strange and unfamiliar. "Excuse me," a woman's voice came from behind as we reached a clearing. She'd introduced herself earlier as Valerie something. "I don't want to alarm anyone, but I thought I saw someone standing just off the trail back there." I turned my flashlight toward her face, careful not to blind her. She was in her early 40s, ash blonde hair pulled back, eyes serious and alert. "Park staff?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, This sounds strange, but it seemed to blend into the trees. Like camouflage, but too perfect." A father from another family laughed. "Probably just a deer. They freeze when they hear us coming." "Maybe," Valerie said, not sounding convinced. "It just seemed too tall for a deer." I nodded professionally, the way Head Ranger Martin had taught us to handle visitor concerns. "I'll make a note of it for our patrol team. This time of year, we occasionally get hikers going off trail against regulations." The explanation seemed to satisfy the group, and we continued toward Osprey Point. I found myself scanning the tree line more carefully, my flashlight beam catching nothing but ordinary shadows between trunks and undergrowth. Tommy had fallen silent, his earlier excitement dampened. He stayed close to his parents for the remainder of the hike, no longer racing ahead to inspect interesting rocks or plants. When we finally returned to the trailhead parking lot, he gave me a small wave goodbye that somehow felt like a disappointment. I didn't think about Tommy again until the next morning, when my radio crackled to life at 6:47 a.m. "All available rangers to Chipmunk Campground, Site 14. Missing child. Repeat, missing child at Chipmunk 14. My stomach dropped as I recognized the campsite number assigned to the Winters family the previous day. The next 12 hours blurred together in a frantic search operation that grew larger with each passing hour. Tommy had apparently vanished from his family's tent sometime between midnight and dawn. His parents had fallen asleep with him safely between them, but woke to find his sleeping bag empty, the tent zipper partially open. By noon, we had park rangers, local police, and volunteers combing every trail, ravine, and creek. Helicopter support arrived by mid-afternoon, the rhythmic thumping of rotors drowning out birdsong as they swept low over the canopy. Search dogs sniffed Tommy's dinosaur pajamas and led their handlers down trails, only to circle back confused or lose the scent entirely. I retraced our night hike path 3 times, calling his name until my voice grew hoarse. Each time I passed the spot where he'd pointed out the green light, I slowed, examining the area more carefully than before. The undergrowth showed no signs of disturbance, no broken branches or footprints leading off trail. Nothing to indicate an 8-year-old boy had wandered this way. "You were his guide last night?" Ranger Martin asked when we crossed paths near Osprey Point. His weathered face looked even more lined than usual, his normally impeccable uniform rumpled from hours of searching. "Yes, sir," I answered. "We finished the hike at 10:30. Everyone returned to the parking lot together." "Anything unusual happen? Did the boy separate from the group at any point?" I hesitated, remembering Tommy's excited face as he pointed into the darkness. "No separation. He did mention seeing a green light in the woods. I told him it was probably a firefly." Martin's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Green light? Just for a moment, I saw it too, but it disappeared quickly." He nodded slowly. "And that woman's report about seeing someone off trail, you mentioned it in your log." "Valerie. She thought she saw a figure that blended with the trees. I assumed it was a deer or shadows playing tricks." Martin studied me for a long moment. "We'll find him. Kids wander off all the time." But we didn't find Tommy Winters. Not that day, not the next, not in the weeks that followed. The search scaled back gradually as hope diminished. His parents remained at the park for 17 days, hollow-eyed and increasingly desperate, before local authorities gently convinced them to return home while the investigation continued. I kept working through July and into August, leading daytime hikes with forced cheerfulness and avoiding night tours when possible. The disappearance made national news for a week before fading into the background of other tragedies. Park attendance dropped sharply after the story broke, then slowly recovered as summer peaked. But the forest had changed for me. Or perhaps I finally noticed what had been there all along. It started with small things, rustling in bushes that stopped too abruptly when approached, cold spots on sun-drenched trails that chilled my skin as I passed through them, the sensation of being watched while leading a group, only to turn and find nothing behind us. And the green light, never as clear as Tommy had seen it, just glimpses at dusk or dawn, a flash between distant trees that vanished when I tried to focus on it. "You ever see anything strange out on the trails?" I asked David Thorne, one of the permanent rangers, as we restocked the visitor center one evening. David, 60-something with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, paused his inventory count. "Strange how? I don't know. Lights. Figures that don't look quite right." He studied me longer than necessary before answering. "These woods are old, Jamie. Been here long before the park, long before any of us." He returned to counting trail maps, adding more softly, "Some places have their own rules. Best to respect them and stay on marked paths." By August, I carried a sense of unease that never fully dissipated, a constant awareness of the forest's presence at my back. Night hikes became an exercise in controlled anxiety. I caught myself scanning the trees constantly, jumping at natural forest sounds I should have recognized instantly. The season's end came as a relief. Tommy's case remained open but inactive, filed away with other unsolved disappearances that occasionally happen in wilderness areas. I packed my small cabin and left Pine Ridge without attending the staff farewell dinner, unable to face the practiced sympathy in my colleagues' eyes. Back in my apartment in Mapleton, 30 miles from the park boundary, I tried to convince myself that Tommy had simply wandered off and gotten lost. That sometimes accidents happened in the wilderness, and no one was to blame. That the unease I felt was normal guilt from being unable to help find him. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when sleep refused to come, I saw Tommy's small hand pointing into the darkness and heard his confident voice. That wasn't a firefly. It was too big. During winter, I applied for guiding positions at other parks, seeking something less remote, less wild. I nearly convinced myself I was overreacting to a tragic but explainable incident. Then the pandemic hit. National parks announced closures, including Pine Ridge, which posted a notice about remaining closed for the entire 2020 season due to staffing limitations and safety concerns. I felt a shameful rush of relief. I wouldn't have to decide whether to return. Wouldn't have to face those trails again. At least not yet. The reprieve gave me space to breathe, to push the memories further away. But sometimes, catching the reflection of headlights through my kitchen window, or watching fireflies in my small backyard, I'd glimpse a particular shade of green that sent a chill through my chest, and I'd remember the way Valerie had described what she saw. Something that blended too perfectly with the trees, something too tall to be a deer. I tried telling myself these were just memories distorted by guilt, that nothing unnatural lurked in those woods. But I didn't believe it. Not really. Not even when I said it out loud to the empty rooms of my apartment, as if repetition might make it true. And these ponderosa pines can live for up to 500 years, I explained to the cluster of eager visitors surrounding me. You can identify them by their puzzle piece bark patterns and the faint vanilla scent they sometimes give off. A gray-haired woman in a floral bucket hat leaned closer to the nearest trunk, inhaling deeply. I smell it, like butterscotch cookies. I nodded, pleased by her enthusiasm. The forest trail stretched before us, dappled with late morning sunlight that filtered through the canopy. 12 faces looked back at me with varying degrees of interest, all alive, all present, all accounted for. The thought crossed my mind unbidden, a constant tally I couldn't seem to shake. Let's continue toward Marmot Meadow, I said, turning to lead the group forward. The wildflowers are spectacular this time of year. The trail was familiar beneath my boots. I'd walked it countless times before, pointing out the same landmarks, reciting the same facts. Yet everything felt simultaneously comfortable and wrong, like putting on an old sweater only to find it had shrunk in the wash. I hadn't planned to return to Pine Ridge. After Tommy Winters vanished, I'd sworn never to set foot in these woods again. But when the pandemic restrictions lifted and the park reopened, something pulled me back. Maybe it was the need for a steady paycheck after months of unemployment. Maybe it was the desperate hope that returning would prove my fears irrational, that Tommy's disappearance had been nothing more than a tragic accident in wilderness that was merely indifferent, not malevolent. Head Ranger Martin had seemed surprised but pleased when I applied for my old position. "Welcome back," he'd said, shaking my hand firmly. "The trails missed you." I'd smiled and nodded, swallowing the question that burned in my throat. Had they ever found any trace of Tommy? They hadn't. I checked the case files my first day back. For weeks, I stuck to daytime tours only. The forest in sunlight was manageable, just trees and dirt and wildlife, nothing more. I led families along beginner paths, school groups through educational stations, and senior hikers on birdwatching expeditions. Normal. Safe. The growing collection of post-pandemic visitors kept me busy enough to push memories of green lights and impossible figures to the back of my mind. "Jamie?" Martin's voice pulled me from my thoughts as I completed paperwork after an afternoon hike. "Got a minute?" I looked up from the visitor logs I was updating. "Sure. We're short-staffed for night hikes next week. 3 groups already booked." My hand tightened around my pen. I thought David usually covers those. Threw his back out helping move equipment yesterday. He's on light duty for at least 2 weeks. Martin leaned against the doorframe of the small ranger station. You've got the most experience with the nocturnal wildlife program. I kept my expression neutral while my stomach clenched. I can check my schedule. I wouldn't ask if we had options. His eyes held mine for a beat too long. Unless there's a reason you're avoiding night shifts. The challenge in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. I wondered how much he knew about my sleepless nights, my jumpiness in the dark. No reason, I lied. I can take them. Martin nodded once. Good. First one's Tuesday, College Outdoor Club from Mapleton University. The next few days passed too quickly. Each morning, I woke with a sense of dread that grew heavier as the night hike approached. I found myself checking and rechecking my equipment obsessively. Flashlight batteries, first aid supplies, radio charged to full capacity. Tuesday evening arrived with perfect weather for stargazing. Clear skies, mild temperature, light breeze. I stood at the trailhead parking lot, watching headlights cut through the gathering darkness as cars pulled in. College students spilled out, laughing and jostling each other, oblivious to my tightly wound nerves. Welcome to Pine Ridge Night Explorers, I began once they'd gathered around. I'm Jamie, your guide tonight. We'll be taking the Ridgeline Trail to Osprey Point, about 2 miles round trip. Please stay together and keep your flashlights pointed at the ground to preserve night vision. I counted 23 students plus their faculty advisor. 24 total. The number lodged in my brain as we set off, my senses hyper-alert to every shadow and sound. The first night hike passed without incident, as did the second. No green lights, no figures blending into trees, just normal forest noises and excited visitors pointing out constellations at the lookout point. My confidence inched upward with each successful return to the parking lot, all visitors accounted for. By the third night hike, I almost believed I'd imagined everything from before. Almost. Has anyone seen a fox in the wild? I asked the group of 18 college students huddled around me. We were about halfway to Osprey Point, stopped to examine tracks in a patch of soft earth beside the trail. A tall, lanky guy with glasses and a camera hanging around his neck raised his hand. I photographed some last year in Yellowstone. They're crepuscular, right? Most active at dawn and dusk? That's right, I said, impressed. You've done your homework. Evan's our resident wildlife expert, a girl next to him said, nudging his arm. He can identify like every bird call ever. Evan shrugged, adjusting his glasses. Not even close, but I'm working on it. We continued along the trail, the group's flashlight beams bobbing like fireflies through the darkness. I found myself relaxing into the familiar routine, pointing out nurse logs where new saplings grew from fallen trees, explaining how owls' asymmetrical ear openings help them pinpoint prey in total darkness. I noticed Evan hanging back from the main group occasionally, framing photos of the night sky through gaps in the canopy. His camera flash temporarily blinded me once, followed by a quick apology. Sorry, he whispered, moving up beside me. I switched to night mode. No more flash, promise. I nodded, scanning ahead to ensure the group stayed together. Get any good shots? A few. The light pollution is minimal here compared to... He stopped abruptly, head turning sharply toward a dense stand of pines to our right. Something wrong? I asked. Evan stared into the darkness. I thought I saw someone. My skin prickled. One of the group? No. His voice dropped lower. Standing between the trees. Tall. I only caught a glimpse, but... He trailed off, frowning. But what? It looked like they were... He seemed to struggle for words. Blended into the bark somehow, like camouflage, but perfect. Too perfect. The phrase hit me like ice water. The same words Valerie had used nearly 2 years ago, the night before Tommy vanished. Probably just shadows, I said, not believing it myself. The human brain is wired to find patterns, especially faces. Evan didn't look convinced, but nodded. Yeah, probably. Stay with the group, I instructed, more sharply than intended. These trails get confusing in the dark. He gave me a curious look before rejoining his friends. I did a quick head count, 18, including Evan, before leading them around the next bend in the trail. 5 minutes later, we reached a small clearing where the path branched. I waited for everyone to catch up before explaining the route. From here, it's just a 1/4 mile to Osprey Point Lookout. The incline gets steeper, so watch your footing. I counted heads again as they passed. 15, 16, 17, 17. I counted again, my pulse quickening. 17 students stood before me, plus their faculty advisor. 1 was missing. "Where's Evan?" I asked, interrupting a student mid-question. The group looked around, murmuring and shining flashlights behind them. "He was just here," the girl who'd spoken earlier said. "Taking pictures of that weird-shaped tree." "Which tree? When?" "Just a minute ago, before we reached the clearing." I keyed my radio instantly. "Base, this is Jamie on Ridgeline Trail. I have a separated hiker, adult male, approximately 20 years old. Dark hair, glasses, camera equipment. Last seen 5 minutes ago near trail marker 16. The response came immediately. "Copy that. Sending backup. Keep the group together and continue to the lookout point. Security will start from the trailhead and work toward you." "Should we go back and look for him?" several students asked simultaneously. "No," I said firmly. "We stay together. Park security is on their way. The best thing we can do is continue to Osprey Point where we have better visibility and wait for them there." The mood shifted instantly from casual enjoyment to tense concern. I led them up the final stretch to the lookout, my mind replaying Evan's words. Blended into the bark somehow, like camouflage, but perfect. At Osprey Point, I instructed everyone to stay in the cleared area while I spoke with park security via radio. Flashlights swept the surrounding forest edge repeatedly. Voices called Evan's name into the darkness. No response came. Park security arrived 20 minutes later, followed by 2 more rangers. They took statements from students who'd last seen Evan while I provided his description and last known location. "Did he mention going off trail for any reason?" Ranger Chen asked me. I swallowed. "He said he saw someone standing in the trees. I told him it was probably shadows." Chen's flashlight beam caught my face. "Someone? Another hiker?" "I don't know. He just said they looked like they blended into the bark." Chen and the other ranger exchanged glances I couldn't read in the darkness. "We'll find him," Chen assured me. But the words rang hollow. The same empty promise Martin had made about Tommy. By midnight, the search had expanded to include local police. The student group was escorted back to the parking lot while I remained with the search team, retracing our path again and again. We found nothing. No footprints veering off trail, no broken branches, no sign of disturbance. Evan had simply vanished between one moment and the next. Dawn brought more searchers, but no new clues. Helicopter rotors thumped overhead, search dogs strained at leashes, sniffing the air confusion. The scene was an exact replay of Tommy's disappearance, down to the finest detail. "Jamie," Martin's voice came from behind me as I stood at the spot where Evan had last been seen. "My office," Now. I followed him silently, exhaustion and dread weighing every step. His office door closed behind us with a final sounding click. "Sit," he ordered, taking his own chair behind the cluttered desk. I sank into the wooden seat across from him, aware of how disheveled I must look after searching all night. "This is the second disappearance during one of your night hikes," Martin said, his tone deliberately neutral. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened." "I've already given my statement. Not the official version. Everything, including anything unusual you might have noticed." I stared at him. "Like what?" "Like what Evan claimed to see before he vanished. What Tommy Winters saw before he vanished." The moment hung between us, taut with unspoken questions. "The green light," I said finally. "Tommy saw it first. I've been seeing it more often lately at the forest edge during dusk, and Evan—" I took a deep breath. "Evan said he saw someone who blended into the trees. The exact same thing Valerie Prentice reported the night before Tommy disappeared." Martin's expression remained unreadable. "And did you see anything?" "No, but that doesn't mean—" "Two people gone without a trace on your watch, Jamie, both after reporting unusual sightings that nobody else witnessed." The implication stung. "You think I'm involved? Or making this up?" "I think you're under immense stress. Guilt from the first incident may be affecting your judgment. You don't believe me. I believe you believe what you're saying." Martin leaned forward. "But we deal in facts. The fact is we have another missing person and no evidence of foul play." I left his office feeling worse than when I'd entered. The search for Evan continued in the background of my daily routine, but hope diminished with each passing day. His parents arrived from Seattle, hollow-eyed and desperate for answers no one could provide. Others began noticing strange occurrences too. A maintenance worker reported tools rearranged in the equipment shed overnight. The night receptionist described unusual scratching sounds outside the visitor center windows. 2 junior rangers requested transfers after claiming they heard someone perfectly mimicking their voices in the forest. I started documenting everything in a small notebook: dates, times, locations of anything unexplainable. The green light appeared with increasing frequency, visible from my cabin window most evenings for brief seconds. One morning in early July, I stepped outside to find a set of footprints in the soft earth beneath my bedroom window. They were elongated and narrow, with an odd impression that suggested impossible weight distribution. The prints simply ended halfway across the clearing, as if whatever made them had vanished mid-stride or lifted straight into the air. I photographed them before they disappeared under the boots of the day shift rangers trudging past. No one else seemed to notice, and I couldn't bring myself to point them out, not after Martin's reaction. That night, the scratching began. At first, I mistook it for tree branches against the cabin's outer wall, but as it continued, methodical, deliberate, I realized it was concentrated around my door. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. For hours, without variation or cessation. I sat frozen on my bed, radio in one hand, flashlight in the other, watching the doorknob. It never turned, but the scratching continued until first light filtered through my curtains. Only then did I creep to the door and press my ear against it. Silence. When I finally worked up the courage to look outside, the wooden door frame showed fresh marks. 3 parallel grooves repeated dozens of times, too high and too precisely spaced to be from any animal I recognized. I wrote my resignation letter that morning with shaking hands. Martin accepted it without question, his eyes lingering on the dark circles under mine. "You should get some rest," was all he said. I packed my belongings in under an hour, throwing clothes and essentials into my car with frantic efficiency. As I pulled away from the staff parking area, I caught a final glimpse of Pine Ridge in my rearview mirror, the ancient pines standing sentinel, unchanged for centuries, harboring secrets I could no longer pretend didn't exist. Whatever had taken Tommy Winters had returned for Evan, and something told me it wouldn't stop there. "Try taking it out halfway first, then give it a good pull," I explained to the woman struggling with her tent poles. "The joints can get stuck if you force them." She nodded gratefully as I demonstrated with the display model. The outdoor shop smelled of waterproofing spray and new nylon, familiar scents that should have been comforting. I'd been working at Mapleton Outfitters for 6 weeks, and customers already asked for me by name when they needed gear advice. "I'm heading out to Cooper Lake this weekend," she said, carefully collapsing the tent pole the way I'd shown her. "Ever been?" "Not yet," I replied, helping her pack the tent back into its stuff sack. "I hear the sunrise view is worth the early wake-up, though." What I didn't tell her was that I hadn't been camping since leaving Pine Ridge. My own gear sat untouched in my closet, collecting dust while I sold equipment to weekend adventurers. The thought of sleeping in a forest made my hands shake. The store bell chimed as the woman left, shopping bag swinging. I turned to reorganize the tent display and froze. Across the street, partially obscured by a parked delivery truck, stood a tall figure in a forest green jacket. Even from this distance, I could make out the unnatural width of his smile. I blinked, and he was gone. "Just take your lunch break already," called Marta from behind the register. "You've been staring at the window for 5 minutes." I nodded, suddenly aware of my dry mouth. "Yeah, sorry, back in 30. The September air held the first hint of autumn crispness as I hurried down the block to the sandwich shop, checking over my shoulder twice. I'd been seeing things since coming back to Mapleton. Shadows moving in peripheral vision, figures that vanished when I turned to look. Normal trauma responses, according to the internet searches I'd been obsessively conducting at 3 a.m. The remainder of my shift passed without incident. I helped 3 college students select hiking boots, processed a return for a defective camp stove, and restocked the flashlight display. Normal tasks, safe tasks. By closing time, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the figure in the green jacket. Then I saw him again on my walk home. He stood on the corner 2 blocks from my apartment building, his back to me. Something about his posture seemed wrong, too still, too straight, as if he were a photograph of a person rather than a person himself. I ducked into the convenience store and waited, heart hammering against my ribs. When I emerged 10 minutes later, the corner was empty. My apartment welcomed me with stale air and unwashed dishes. I locked the door, checked the deadbolt twice, then systematically closed every curtain before turning on the lights. The routine had become second nature since returning from Pine Ridge. I ate microwave ramen while scrolling through job listings on my laptop. Something further away. Something that didn't remind me of forests or parks or wilderness areas. Something safe. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, interrupted by the normal sounds of apartment living. Neighbors walking overhead, the building's heating system clicking on, distant traffic. Normal sounds that now set my nerves jangling. I woke to rapid tapping on my bedroom window. My eyes flew open, body rigid with fear. The sound came again, tap, 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 precise and deliberate against the glass. My third-floor apartment shouldn't have allowed anyone to reach my window. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing as the tapping continued for 17 excruciating seconds before stopping abruptly. Only when dawn painted my walls with pale light did I finally gather enough courage to pull back the curtain. Nothing but the brick wall of the neighboring building greeted me. No ledge, no fire escape, nothing that could explain what I'd heard. I was late to work, having triple-checked every lock and window before leaving. Marta raised an eyebrow but said nothing as I hurried to the back room to deposit my bag. "Coffee's fresh," she offered instead. "You look like you need it." 3 days passed without incident. I began to relax, settling into the comforting repetition of work and home. Perhaps I really had imagined everything, stress responses to trauma, just like the articles suggested. Then I saw him at the cafe where I ate breakfast. He sat in the far corner, hands folded neatly on the table before him, wearing the same forest green jacket. His smile stretched too wide across his face, revealing too many teeth, while his eyes remained flat and dark, like holes punched into paper. He didn't order anything, didn't speak, just watched me with that fixed grin as I abandoned my half-eaten bagel and fled. "You're being followed?" Liz asked that evening, her voice tinny through my phone speaker. "Have you called the police?" I paced my living room, keeping away from windows. "And tell them what? That a creepy guy is showing up in public places? That's not exactly criminal." "It could be stalking," Liz countered, "especially if it's consistent." I hadn't told her about the window tapping, about how I'd seen him standing across from my apartment building 3 nights in a row now, never moving, just watching with that frozen smile. About how he sometimes seemed to blend into shadows in ways that defied normal light physics. "Jamie? You still there?" "Yeah," I said, forcing my thoughts back to the conversation. "Sorry. When was the last time you slept properly?" Her concern was evident even through the phone. "You don't sound great." I laughed, the sound brittle in my empty apartment. "That obvious, huh?" "Listen, I've been thinking." Liz paused, choosing her words carefully. "What you went through at Pine Ridge was traumatic. 2 people disappeared on your watch. It would affect anyone. I know what you're going to say. You need to talk to someone professional," she continued anyway. "This might be PTSD. The symptoms, hypervigilance, seeing threats everywhere, insomnia, it all fits." "You think I'm imagining him?" The words came out flatter than I intended. "I think your brain might be processing trauma in ways that feel very real." I didn't argue. What could I say? That the creatures that took Tommy and Evan had followed me home? That the man's unnaturally perfect grin reminded me of what Valerie had described? That sometimes, in certain lights, his skin looked like tree bark? "There's a therapist in the medical building next to my office," Liz offered into my silence. "She specializes in trauma. I could make a call." I relented, if only to ease her worry. "Okay, fine, I'll go." "Good." The relief in her voice was palpable. "I'll text you her information. First step to getting better, right?" After hanging up, I stood in the darkness of my apartment, staring at the sliver of street visible between my curtains. A figure stood beneath the lamppost directly across from my building. He hadn't been there when the call started. I yanked the curtains closed and began methodically checking the locks again. By early October, I'd developed elaborate systems to avoid predictability. I left work at different times each day, took varying routes home, and shopped at random grocery stores across town. I kept curtains drawn constantly and installed additional locks on my apartment door. Sleep became a luxury afforded only during daylight hours, when the tapping at my window ceased. My first therapy appointment arrived. I sat in Dr. Bennett's office, surrounded by calming blue walls and generic landscape paintings, and told her a sanitized version of events at Pine Ridge. 2 hikers had gone missing during tours I led. I felt responsible. Now I was experiencing anxiety and possibly hallucinations. "Hallucinations?" She made a note on her pad. Can you describe them? I hesitated. A man following me, always wearing the same clothes, always smiling. And you believe this person isn't real? I don't know what I believe anymore. She nodded thoughtfully. Traumatic experiences can disrupt our sense of safety in profound ways. Our brains become hyper-alert to potential threats, sometimes creating them when none exist. I left with a referral for sleep medication and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following week. The pills remained untaken on my bathroom counter. Something told me I needed to stay alert. That night, I woke to more tapping, louder than before. As I lay paralyzed in bed, eyes fixed on the curtained window, something new happened. A faint green glow seeped around the edges of the fabric, pulsing softly in the darkness of my bedroom. The same emerald light Tommy had pointed out in the forest. The light I'd glimpsed repeatedly before Evan disappeared. It hovered outside my third-story window, impossible and undeniable. I didn't sleep again that night. When morning came, I called in sick to work and spent the day researching Pine Ridge's history on my laptop. Missing persons cases stretched back decades, clustered around certain areas of the park. None mentioned strange lights or grinning figures, but the patterns were there for anyone willing to connect the dots. In my browser history, I found searches I didn't remember making. Predators that mimic human voices. Folklore about creatures that imitate humans. Beings that can change shape. Each search felt like a breadcrumb leading toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. The knocking started at 2:17 a.m. Not tapping this time. Proper, deliberate knocking on my apartment door. 3 sharp raps followed by silence. Then 3 more. I sat up in bed, the revolver I'd purchased the previous week clutched in my sweating hand. The knocking continued, methodical and patient. After the 4th sequence, a voice called out. Not from the hallway, but seemingly from inside my apartment. Jamie. Perfect inflection, perfect cadence. Liz's voice, down to the slight way she emphasized the second syllable of my name. Jamie, are you awake? I need to talk to you. My breath caught. Liz lived across town. She would never show up unannounced at this hour. I know you're in there, the voice continued, shifting subtly. Now it sounded like my mother, though she lived 3 states away. Please open the door, sweetheart. I'm worried about you. I reached for my phone with my free hand, never taking my eyes off the door. No service. The screen showed full battery but 0 signal bars. The knocking resumed, harder now, rattling the hinges despite the security chain and deadbolt. Jamie Reed. My own voice now, perfect in every detail. Let me in. I can explain everything. Clutching the gun, I crept toward the door on unsteady legs. The peephole showed only darkness at first, then a face pressed against it from the other side. The grinning man, his smile impossibly wide, eyes like empty wells. He stared directly at me as if the peephole offered no barrier to his sight. Behind him stood something else. A tall, emaciated figure with limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its head bore massive antlers that seemed to shift and change even as I watched, sometimes appearing like branches, sometimes like reaching fingers. It swayed slightly, its skin the texture of decaying bark. I stumbled backward, a scream locked in my throat. This was no hallucination, no PTSD-induced vision. These were the creatures from Pine Ridge, the things that had taken Tommy and Evan, and they had followed me home. The knocking stopped abruptly. Through the sudden silence, I heard something worse, the sound of my doorknob turning slowly, testing against the locks. I moved with desperate speed. Grabbed my backpack, shoved in essentials, wallet, keys, phone charger, the gun. Pulled on shoes and a jacket, while never taking my eyes off the door, which remained secure but felt increasingly fragile. There was nowhere to run. Nothing to do but return to where it all began. I climbed out onto my fire escape, the metal rattling beneath my feet. The street below lay empty in the pre-dawn darkness. No sign of the creatures, but that offered little comfort. They could be anywhere, blending into shadows, waiting. My car started on the first try. I pulled away from the curb with shaking hands on the wheel, checking the rearview mirror obsessively. The road stretched empty behind me, but I couldn't shake the certainty that I was being followed. The highway signs for Pine Ridge National Park appeared after 3 hours of driving. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as the familiar forest loomed ahead, massive pines standing sentinel along the roadside. I was going back to the place I'd sworn never to return, searching for answers from the only person who might know the truth. David Thorne had tried to warn me about these woods having their own rules. Now I needed to know exactly what that meant. The sun rose behind me as I drove deeper into the park, casting long shadows across the road. Somewhere in these ancient trees lurked the truth about what had taken Tommy and Evan, what was now hunting me. Whatever waited at Pine Ridge couldn't possibly be worse than what I'd left behind in my apartment. At least that's what I told myself as the forest closed around me once more. Pine Ridge materialized through the thinning darkness, like something half-remembered from a nightmare. The entrance sign loomed above my car, the carved wooden lettering obscured by tendrils of morning fog that curled around the weathered posts. I slowed, but didn't stop at the unmanned entrance booth. No need for a park pass when you're not officially a visitor. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel for the 3-hour drive. I flexed my fingers and checked the rearview mirror for the 20th time in as many minutes. The road behind me remained empty, swallowed by mist, but that meant nothing. I'd learned the hard way that emptiness wasn't the same as absence. I bypassed the main road leading to the visitor center and headquarters, taking instead a narrow service road that snaked deeper into the forest. The unmarked turnoff was easy to miss, hidden between 2 ancient pines, their branches forming a natural archway that seemed to swallow my car. Park visitors never came this way, neither did most rangers, but David Thorne would be here. His warning from months ago echoed in my mind. These woods are old, been here long before the park, long before any of us. Some places have their own rules. I'd written it off as ranger mysticism then. Now those words felt like the only truth I had left to cling to. The service road deteriorated into little more than a rutted path. Pine needles coated my windshield as low branches scraped against the car. The forest pressed in on all sides, the trees growing impossibly tall and dense, blocking what little morning light struggled through the fog. The auxiliary ranger station appeared suddenly around a tight bend, a small cabin constructed of dark timber and river stone, its windows reflecting the dull gray of dawn. A single Park Service truck sat parked at an angle near the entrance, its green paint faded and mud-spattered. David's vehicle hadn't changed in the months since I'd left. I killed the engine but remained in the car, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the faint whisper of wind through pine needles. The silence felt weighted, as if the forest held its breath around me. My phone showed no service bars. I was completely cut off. Perfect. I grabbed my backpack, feeling the reassuring weight of the revolver inside, and stepped into the chill October air. The ground felt unnaturally soft beneath my boots, cushioned by decades of fallen pine needles. Each step made barely a whisper as I approached the station's door. I hesitated before knocking. What if David wasn't here? What if he couldn't help? Or worse, what if he thought I was as crazy as everyone else seemed to believe? The door swung open before my knuckles connected with the wood. David Thorne stood in the doorway, his lean frame blocking the entrance. His weathered face registered first surprise, then something darker, concern, or maybe fear. The silver hair peeking from beneath his ranger hat seemed thinner than I remembered, his piercing blue eyes more sunken. "Jamie Reed," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Didn't expect to see you back in these parts." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I need to talk to you." His eyes scanned the forest behind me, narrowing slightly before returning to my face. "Better come inside then." The station's interior smelled of coffee, old paper, and pine resin. A single desk occupied the center of the main room, covered in topographical maps, weighted down with coffee mugs and rock specimens. Bookshelves lined the walls, stuffed with wildlife guides, weather logs, and leather-bound journals that looked ancient. A wood stove in the corner radiated welcome heat that failed to penetrate the cold dread in my bones. David closed the door behind me, sliding a heavy deadbolt into place with a thunk that seemed unnecessarily final. "Coffee?" he asked, already moving toward a pot that looked like it had been brewing since sunrise. I nodded, unsure if my voice would remain steady. While he poured, I noticed details I'd missed at first glance. The shotgun propped in the corner, the heavy curtains drawn over windows despite the early hour, the multiple locks on the door. David handed me a chipped mug and gestured toward a wooden chair near the desk. I sat, wrapping cold fingers around the warm ceramic. "You look like hell," he observed, settling into his own chair. "I haven't slept in days." "Most people who leave Pine Ridge sleep better, not worse." His tone remained conversational, but his eyes never stopped moving, studying my face, my posture, my trembling hands. I took a deep breath. "I need to know what's in these woods." David's face remained impassive. "Wildlife, trees, rocks, same as any national park." "That's not what I mean." "Then what do you mean exactly?" I set down the coffee mug before my shaking hands could spill it. "Something followed me home from Pine Ridge. Something that shouldn't exist." David didn't respond, his expression unreadable. "It stands outside my apartment every night," I continued, the words tumbling out faster now. "It taps on my third-floor window. It knocks on my door and calls to me using other people's voices. My friend's voice, my mother's. Sometimes my own. Still nothing. It has a face that's almost human, but not quite. A smile that's too wide, with too many teeth. Eyes like holes," David finished quietly. "Empty holes punched in paper." The air left my lungs in a rush. He knew. He fucking knew. "And there's another one," I added, my voice barely a whisper now. "Taller, with limbs that bend wrong. Its head has—" I struggled to describe what I'd seen through the peephole. "Antlers," David said. "That change shape when you're not looking directly at them." I nodded, relief and fresh terror washing over me in equal measure. "What are they?" David rose abruptly, moving to check the locks on the door again before drawing the curtains tighter. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind, coming to a decision. "We call them mimics," he finally said, turning to face me, though that name barely scratches the surface of what they are. "We? You and who else?" "Those of us who know, who've seen them and lived." He rubbed a hand across his face, suddenly looking much older. "Not many in that club." David pulled a leather-bound journal from the nearest shelf and placed it on the desk between us. The cover bore no title, just the faded impression of what might have been a hand. "Martin knows too, doesn't he?" I asked, recalling the head ranger's strange reaction when I'd mentioned the green light. David nodded. "Park administration has known about them for generations." It's passed down from one head ranger to the next. Official policy is containment and classification. Containment? They're not contained. They followed me to Mapleton. That's what I've been trying to tell them. David's voice hardened. The mimics are expanding their territory, growing bolder. He opened the journal to a hand-drawn map of Pine Ridge. Red X marks dotted the page, clustered in certain regions. Every disappearance I've been able to document, he explained. Going back almost 70 years. My records before that are spotty, but the pattern's clear enough. I leaned closer, noticing how the marks concentrated in the northern sectors of the park, particularly around Osprey Point, where both Tommy and Evan had vanished. What are they? I asked again. David closed the journal. No one knows for certain. They've been here since before European settlement. The indigenous peoples of this region had stories about forest spirits that could take human form to lure travelers astray. Early settlers had their own tales about devils in the woods that stole children and mimicked human voices. But what do they want? To feed. The simple words landed like stones. They're predators, Jamie. Highly specialized predators that have evolved to hunt humans. I thought about the green light Tommy had seen, the same light that had appeared outside my window. The lights are a lure. Like an anglerfish, David confirmed. They have other methods too. Voice mimicry, appearing as trusted figures, creating curiosity or confusion to separate victims from groups. I remembered Evan seeing someone blended into the trees before he vanished. Tommy pointing excitedly into the forest. Why hide this? People should know. Imagine the panic. The park would close. The economic impact on surrounding communities would be devastating. And for what? The mimics have been here for centuries. They're not leaving. So we just let them take people? Let them kill. We manage, David interrupted. We track patterns. We close certain trails during active periods. We never send rangers out alone in high-risk zones. That's not enough. 2 people disappeared during my hikes alone. David's shoulders sagged. I know, and I've argued for more aggressive measures for years. But I'm outvoted. Martin believes in minimal interference with the natural order. There's nothing natural about these things. Depends on your definition of natural. David moved to a filing cabinet in the corner, unlocking it with a key from his pocket. They're as much a part of this ecosystem as wolves or bears, just older and smarter. He withdrew a worn manila folder and placed it on the desk. Inside were photocopies of yellowed newspaper clippings, journal entries, and what appeared to be official reports, some dating back to the 1800s. I've spent my career documenting them, David explained as I flipped through the papers, learning their habits, their weaknesses. I looked up sharply. Weaknesses? David nodded, moving to a locked cabinet behind his desk. They can be killed, though it's not easy. He entered a combination into a small safe and removed something wrapped in oiled cloth. When he unwrapped it, a revolver gleamed dully in the cabin's low light. Standard issue won't penetrate their hide, he said, checking the cylinder before closing it with a snap. It's like bark, but stronger. Bullets just get absorbed. Then how? The throat. David pointed to his own. It's their only vulnerable spot. Hit them there, and they die like anything else. He offered me the revolver, handle first. I hesitated before taking it, feeling its weight, heavier than the gun in my backpack. Silver bullets? I asked with a weak attempt at humor. David didn't smile. Regular ammunition, but it needs to be precise. Anywhere else just makes them angry. I stared at the weapon in my hand. You're giving this to me? "You've been marked," David said simply. "Once a mimic chooses prey, it doesn't stop. Not ever." The word prey sent a chill down my spine. The one that followed me home. Has been stalking you for days, maybe weeks before you noticed. That's their pattern. Observe, learn, then isolate. I thought about all the times I'd felt watched in Mapleton. The figure across from my apartment building. The face at the cafe. Why me? David shrugged. Could be random. Could be you noticed them first, during the Winters boys' disappearance. They don't like being seen for what they truly are. How many types are there? I asked, remembering the differences between the grinning man and the antlered creature. At least 3 that I've documented. The woodsman, that's your grinning man. The Wendigo or forest walker, the one with the antlers. And something older that rarely shows itself. Something I call the root. I absorbed this information in horrified silence. Names made them more real somehow, more concrete than the shadowy figures haunting my nightmares. The woodsman hunts alone, David continued, his voice taking on the tone of a biologist discussing ordinary wildlife. It's patient, methodical. The Wendigo is more aggressive, serves as both hunter and sentinel. They work together sometimes, which is unusual for predator species. And the root? David's expression darkened. Pray you never encounter it. I've only seen it once, from a distance. It appeared to be controlling the others somehow. The implications were overwhelming. Not just monsters, but an organized society of them, with hierarchy and coordination. I felt sick. What do I do? My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. Go home. Fortify your space. And if they come for you? David nodded toward the revolver in my hand. Aim for the throat. I glanced toward the windows. The morning fog had lifted, but afternoon shadows already stretched long across the forest floor. Evening would arrive soon. They're more active at night, aren't they? I asked, though I already knew the answer. David nodded. You should leave now. Get back to Mapleton before dark. I carefully wrapped the revolver and placed it in my backpack. The weight of it felt simultaneously reassuring and terrifying, a tangible admission that the nightmare was real. The park administration, I said as I rose to leave, they just let this continue? People dying, being hunted? They consider it a natural hazard, David replied, bitterness edging his voice. Like avalanches or flash floods, part of wilderness management. That's insane. That's bureaucracy. He walked me to the door but paused before unlocking it. One more thing. If you get another job at a national park or any wilderness area, the mimics could track you there. They've got your scent now. Stay in cities. Stay around people. But you stay here, knowing what's in these woods? A ghost of a smile crossed David's weathered face. Someone has to keep count, to know the patterns. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. The forest waited beyond, impossibly still in the late afternoon light. They'll come for you again, David warned. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but they'll come. And if I kill one? Then the others will know you're a threat. He locked eyes with me. And they'll try even harder. I stepped out into the cool air, feeling the immensity of the forest around me. Somewhere among these ancient trees lurked creatures that defied scientific categorization, predators that had evolved to hunt humans with terrifying efficiency. Good luck, Jamie, David said, his voice so low I barely caught it. I nodded once before heading to my car, resisting the urge to run. Every shadow between the trees now seemed to harbor potential danger. Every sound in the underbrush made my heart rate spike. The drive back down the service road felt endless. I checked the rearview mirror obsessively, half expecting to see a green, jacketed figure or antlered silhouette following behind. When I finally reached the main park road, relief washed over me briefly before evaporating under the realization that I was heading back to Mapleton, where they had already found me once. As I passed the Pine Ridge entrance sign, a flash of green caught my eye. Not a jacket, but a tiny pulse of emerald light among the trees, there and gone in an instant. So quick I might have imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. In the passenger seat, my backpack held David's revolver, proof that I wasn't crazy, that others knew the truth. 6 bullets in the cylinder, one vulnerable spot to aim for. I drove toward Mapleton with dusk gathering behind me, wondering if I'd have the courage to pull the trigger when the time came. Wondering if I'd even get the chance before the woodsman's too wide smile was the last thing I ever saw. The hardware store clerk raised his eyebrows as he rang up my purchases. 4 deadbolts, 2-door reinforcement plates, a rubber door wedge, and enough aluminum foil to cook Thanksgiving dinner for a small country. "Expecting trouble?" he asked, scanning the security camera I'd added at the last minute. "Just being cautious," I replied, avoiding eye contact while swiping my credit card. The transaction had nearly maxed out my available balance. I'd driven straight from Pine Ridge to the hardware store, stopping only once for gas and energy drinks. My hands still trembled slightly from the caffeine overdose and the lingering echo of David's words. Once a mimic chooses prey, it doesn't stop. Not ever. The weight of his revolver pressed against my lower back, tucked into my waistband beneath my jacket. It felt both comforting and alien against my skin. A cold, hard reminder that my nightmares had physical form and could be killed. Maybe. Back at my apartment building, I hauled everything upstairs in 2 trips, glancing repeatedly over my shoulder as I struggled with the bags. The hallway remained empty, but that meant nothing. I'd learned that emptiness wasn't absence. I shoved the door closed behind me and immediately wedged a chair under the knob, a temporary measure until I could install the new locks. Without pausing to rest, I emptied the hardware bags onto my living room floor and began sorting through the items with shaking hands. The deadbolts went in first, 1 at top, 1 at bottom, 1 at the standard height, and a 4th halfway between the top and middle. Installing them took longer than expected. My hands kept slipping on the drill, and I had to stop every few minutes to check behind me. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the apartment's chill. Next came the windows. I unrolled sheets of aluminum foil and carefully measured each pane before cutting and pressing the metallic sheets against the glass. The crinkle of foil sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. I secured each piece with duct tape, working methodically from room to room until every window was covered. When I finally finished, my apartment had transformed into a metallic cave, sealed off from the outside world. Daylight filtered through the foil as a dim, diffuse glow. I positioned lamps strategically around each room, angling them to eliminate shadows in corners or behind furniture. Nowhere for anything to hide. My phone buzzed with a text from Liz. "Haven't heard from you in days. You okay?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. What could I possibly say? "Sorry, been busy fortifying my apartment against forest monsters. By the way, if someone who looks like me shows up at your place, run." I settled for, "Fine, just busy. Talk soon." The lie felt necessary. Liz already thought I needed psychiatric help. Telling her about my conversation with David would only confirm her suspicions. I checked the new locks one last time before placing David's revolver on my nightstand and collapsing onto the bed. For the first time in days, I slept without interruption. Exhaustion finally overwhelming fear. 3 days passed without incident. I called in sick to work, ignoring my manager's increasingly irritated messages. My apartment became both fortress and prison. I rationed my food supplies, eating canned soup cold rather than risk using the microwave and missing a sound at the door. I kept the revolver within reach at all times, even carrying it to the bathroom. On the fourth night, the knocking began. 3 precise raps at my door, followed by silence. I froze in the middle of my living room, the half-eaten granola bar in my hand forgotten as I stared at the foil-covered peephole. Another set of knocks, slightly louder. I eased the revolver from my waistband and moved silently toward the bedroom, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the door while maintaining a clear line of sight. "Jamie?" The voice floated through the door, Liz's voice, perfect in every syllable and inflection. "Are you home? I got worried when you didn't answer my texts." I remained absolutely still, barely breathing. My phone was on silent in the kitchen. I couldn't check if Liz had actually texted recently. "I know you're in there," the voice continued. "Your car's outside. Please open up. I just want to make sure you're okay." The doorknob rattled gently, testing against the locks. "Jamie? Why is your door covered in foil? What's going on?" The question confirmed what I already knew. Liz wouldn't ask about the foil because she couldn't see it from the hallway. Only someone, something, pressed directly against the door would know. "I'm calling building security if you don't answer," the voice said, an edge of concern creeping in that sounded exactly like Liz when she was worried. My palms sweated against the revolver's grip as I maintained my silence. Seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, the knocking resumed, harder this time. "Sweetheart?" My mother's voice now, with the slight Midwestern accent that softened her words. "It's Mom. Please open the door. I flew in because I'm worried about you." The shift was seamless, the impersonation flawless. If I hadn't known my mother was currently in Minnesota, I might have believed it was her. "Jamie, honey, please. I just need to know you're all right." I closed my eyes, fighting against the instinct to respond. The voice sounded so genuinely concerned, so perfectly like my mother, that my body automatically wanted to answer. The pleading continued for nearly an hour, cycling between Liz and my mother, occasionally throwing in the voice of my former boss from Pine Ridge. By dawn, the hallway had fallen silent. I remained awake, revolver in hand, staring at the door until sunlight filtered through the foil on my windows. This pattern repeated the following night, and the next, and the next. Each time, the mimic arrived with darkness and departed with dawn. Each time, it employed more desperate tactics, crying in my mother's voice, pounding on the door as if injured, sliding long fingernails between door and frame to scratch at the wood. On the 6th night, I found myself huddled in the bathtub, revolver clutched to my chest, while something that sounded like a wounded animal whined and scratched at my bathroom window. The sound was so close that the thing must have been clinging to the outer wall of the building, 3 stories up. By the 7th day, I existed in a fog of sleep deprivation and terror. My apartment reeked of unwashed clothes and uneaten food. The revolver had left an imprint on my palm from gripping it constantly. I considered calling David, but feared what might happen if I let my guard down long enough to make the call. On the 8th night, the power went out. One moment I sat in my living room chair, facing the door, surrounded by the reassuring glow of strategically placed lamps. The next, darkness swallowed everything. At first I thought it might be just my apartment. Then I heard confused voices in the hallway, neighbors wondering about the outage. Their footsteps and voices faded as they went to check the circuit breakers in the basement. Silence settled over the building, broken only by my ragged breathing. I fumbled for my phone and activated the flashlight function. The beam seemed pitifully inadequate against the pressing darkness. I swept it across the apartment, confirming what I already knew. I was alone. For now. The security systems I'd installed were all electric. Without power, the cameras were useless. I gripped the revolver tighter and waited. The knocking, when it came, wasn't at the door, but at my bedroom window. 3 sharp raps that made me jump despite anticipating them. "Jamie," my own voice called from outside the window. "Let me in. I need to show you something." I kept the phone flashlight trained on the door. That was where it would come from. The windows were just a distraction, a way to make me turn my back. Minutes ticked by in silence. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out any subtle sounds that might warn me of movement. Sweat trickled down my back, despite the apartment's growing chill. Then I heard it. The softest click as a deadbolt turned, not unlocking, but physically rotating from inside the lock itself. My phone light darted to the door. The deadbolt was turning, slowly, steadily, though no key or hand touched it. One by one, each lock disengaged, metal sliding against metal with precise mechanical movements. I stood frozen, revolver aimed at the door, as the final lock released. The door remained closed for several heartbeats, then slowly, almost gently, it swung inward. Nothing stood in the hallway. Just empty darkness beyond the threshold. Then something moved in that darkness. Not a step or a shuffle, but a sort of liquid flowing, a shadow separating from other shadows. It poured into my apartment, a human-shaped silhouette that seemed to absorb what little light my phone cast. I recognized the green jacket first, then the too-wide smile gleaming in the darkness. The woodsman. Its movements were smooth yet wrong, like watching footage played at slightly the wrong speed. "Jamie Reed," it said in my voice as it slithered fully into the apartment. Its proportions shifted as it moved, stretching taller, limbs elongating beyond human possibilities. "I've waited patiently." I backed away, keeping the flashlight trained on it. The beam illuminated its face, the familiar features of the grinning man, but now they seemed to slide and rearrange as if its skin were merely a loosely worn mask. "Stay back," I warned, raising the revolver. My voice sounded stranger than the creature's imitation, hoarse from days of silence and terror. The thing that looked like a man tilted its head at an impossible angle, nearly backward. "I smelled your fear from miles away," it said, using David's voice now. "They always run. They never escape." It took another step forward, its body contorting like liquid poured into different containers as it moved. In the flashlight beam, I could see its skin beginning to ripple, the human disguise melting away in patches to reveal something bark-like beneath. "The throat," I whispered to myself. "Aim for the throat." As if hearing my reminder, the creature's neck elongated, stretching upward as its smile widened beyond the confines of a human face. It lunged forward with impossible speed. I fired twice in rapid succession. The shots were deafening in the small apartment. The creature jerked backward, 2 holes appearing in its chest, but no blood flowed from the wounds. Instead, the bullet holes simply closed like water-absorbing pebbles. The thing laughed, a high, ululating sound that scraped against my eardrums. Its face split open, revealing rows of teeth that resembled nothing human. The green jacket tore as its shoulders broadened and arms lengthened into branch-like appendages. It lunged again, faster this time. I dove to the side, crashing into my coffee table. Pain shot through my hip, but adrenaline pushed it aside. I rolled, bringing the revolver up again as the creature towered over me. Its human disguise had melted away completely now. What stood before me resembled a man-shaped collection of bark and twisted wood, with hollow spaces where eyes should be, and a gaping maw that opened far too wide. Green light pulsed deep within its chest cavity, visible through cracks in its wooden skin. I fired a third time, aiming directly at the center of its throat. The bullet struck true. The creature froze mid-movement, its body going rigid. A high-pitched keening filled the apartment, like wind through a narrow canyon. The green light in its chest flared brightly, then began to dim. The thing that had been the woodsman convulsed violently. Its wooden limbs cracked and split, the bark-like skin peeling away in layers. It tried to step toward me, reaching out with a half-formed hand, but its body was already disintegrating, falling apart into smaller and smaller pieces. In seconds, what had been a nightmarish creature collapsed into a pile of twigs, leaves, and what looked like ordinary forest detritus. The green light pulsed once more, then vanished. A sudden breeze, from where I couldn't tell, scattered the remains across my floor and out the open door, leaving nothing behind but a few dried leaves and the lingering scent of pine resin. I remained frozen, revolver still aimed at where the creature had stood, ears ringing from the gunshots. Minutes passed before I could move, before I could accept what had just happened. I'd killed it. I'd actually killed one of the mimics. The apartment building's power returned shortly before dawn, lights flicking on to illuminate my ransacked living room. The mess looked ordinary, overturned furniture, broken glass, as if I'd simply had a struggle with a home invader. Nothing to suggest the supernatural horror that had occurred. In the days that followed, I gave my notice at work, packed what little I owned, and left Mapleton behind. I drove for 3 days, heading east until I reached the Atlantic coast, as far from Pine Ridge and its ancient forests as I could get. I found a small rental cottage in a fishing village, where the salt air and constant ocean breeze felt clean, purifying. No forests loomed on the horizon, just endless waves and open sky. I took a job at the local library, indoors, surrounded by people and fluorescent lighting, but I never fully recovered. David's revolver remained loaded beneath my bed. Salt lines marked my doorways and windows, not because I believed they would work, but because they made me feel like I was doing something. I kept lights on constantly and jumped at unexpected knocks. I tried therapy briefly, speaking in careful half-truths about trauma and anxiety. The therapist suggested PTSD from my attack, unaware that what had attacked me defied psychological categories as thoroughly as it defied biological ones. Most nights I dreamed of Pine Ridge, of Tommy pointing into the darkness, of Evan vanishing between one moment and the next, of the woodsman's too wide smile as it dissolved into leaves and twigs. I woke from these dreams drenched in sweat, reaching automatically for the revolver. 1 bullet gone, 5 remaining. I often wondered if killing the woodsman had truly ended my nightmare or merely opened a new chapter. David had warned that the others would see me as a threat now. Sometimes I imagined them discussing me in whatever passed for language among their kind, planning, watching from a distance. On foggy nights, when the ocean mist rolled through the village streets, I occasionally glimpsed a familiar green light at the edge of town. Just a pulse of emerald brightness that vanished when directly observed. I never investigated. I kept track of Pine Ridge news through online searches and newspaper archives. 2 more disappearances occurred the following summer. A middle-aged hiker and a teenage girl on a school field trip. The articles described extensive searches, grieving families, and the same empty assurances from park officials that investigations continued. I recognized Head Ranger Martin in one photo, standing beside a search party with the same grim expression he'd worn after Tommy and Evan vanished. He knew what had happened to those people. He knew. And still, he said nothing. Sometimes I drafted emails to the families of the missing, trying to explain what had really happened to their loved ones. I deleted them all unsent. Who would believe me? Who would want to know that their child or parent or sibling had been hunted as prey by something ancient and hungry that wore human skin like a costume? In my darker moments, I imagined the mimic spreading beyond Pine Ridge, establishing territories in other forests, other wilderness areas. How many unexplained disappearances across national parks might be attributed to their kind? How many exposed to the elements or animal attack conclusions masked their true activities? I kept a journal of my experiences, writing down everything I could remember about the mimics, their behavior patterns, and how I'd killed the woodsman. I didn't know if anyone would ever read it, but documenting their existence felt important, a responsibility I couldn't shirk. Each morning I walked along the beach at sunrise, watching waves erase footprints in the sand. The ocean's constant movement comforted me, so different from the ancient stillness of the forest. Nothing could hide in this landscape of open horizons and shifting tides. But at night, when fog rolled in from the sea, I sometimes stood at my window and peered into the mist, searching for green lights or familiar silhouettes. I knew they were still out there, in Pine Ridge certainly, and perhaps beyond, hunting in shadows that humans had dismissed as mere forest legends. And I kept the revolver close, 5 bullets waiting, just in case.